Welcome back to Short Time with Vin and Dave. Vin Ebenu, Dave Crossan with you. And joining us here this morning is Yes Network analyst Jack Curry here to talk about the state of the New York Yankees here as we head from August to September and a lot of very important games coming up. Jack, before we discuss what's going on with the team right now, thanks for coming on and joining the show.
Happy to be here. Happy to talk some Yankee baseball. And as you said, the calendar is changing. So we are getting to the most important part of the season. And then, of course, October hits, and that is by far the most important part of the season.
You know, throughout the months of July and most of August until this sudden resurgence that started in a game pitched by Alek Manoah with the Blue Jays, and then the Yankees took two from the Mets, and then they started taking advantage of the lowly A's. But they're starting to look more reminiscent of that team that was on a pace for 120 wins, set to shatter all kinds of records. Obviously, when you're that good, there's immediate comps to the 98 team and everything. But are you seeing enough with this recent resurgence to say, hey, they're the team that they were, or they're still kind of working their way through things?
I think, Vin, anytime you win about 75% of your games, and you are drawing those comparisons that you referenced, the 98 Yankees, there's going to be some regression. And we saw that regression. But I don't think the Yankees expected that regression to take them to a point where they play under 500 for 50-game stretches. I think they're seeing signs now that they can be a team to be reckoned with again in October, and they can be a team that has a deep postseason run in it. We always talk about pitching, and we always talk about the starting rotation and which pitchers can you rely on. Well, their starters had been great, but then there had been some moments where starters struggled. We got an opportunity to see Garrett Cole in his last outing, and as you said, yes, it was against the lowly A's, but that was more of the Cole that the Yankees need to see. Montas, first three starts as a Yankee, tough. But then his last start, again, positive signs. I think they're still piecing the bullpen together, Vin, and I actually don't think that's a terrible thing because I think Boone has options. I think Jonathan Loaizaga, who a lot of people were ready to give up on, now suddenly looks like he's a weapon again. I think Holmes, when he comes back off the IL, I think he's your closer again. I'm not giving up on a guy who was as great as he was for the first half of the season. So I do think there are positive signs that the Yankees can once again be a team that rightfully declares, hey, they can win a World Series. I was talking to Brian Cashman the other day, and I asked him that, and he said, yeah, I think this is a World Series caliber team.
You know, to your point about the rotation, one of the things that stood out to me about Garrett Cole, obviously the major league leader in strikeouts, and 11 strikeouts Friday exemplified that. But, I mean, he's still had a great season, but I'm curious because he's had some roller coaster moments this year as well where he's looked great. He's obviously the Yankee ace, but there's been some struggles for him on the mound, trying to avoid the big inning, trying to have those clean innings. One of the games that sticks out was last year. It was like a Saturday night game in Houston where he pitched that 1-0 complete game shutout where he just like vintage Garrett Cole. And obviously the wild card game against Boston was the total opposite of that. So what does Garrett Cole have to do down the stretch specifically to show that he's the dominant ace that the Yankees signed?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the big inning because that's obviously been a bugaboo for him. 8 times this year, he's allowed 3 runs or more in an inning. And when you think about an ace and you think about a guy who's going to slam the door, you don't think about those kinds of things. But I would also tell you if you went back and looked at, for instance, CC Sabathia's game log in 2009 when the Yankees won a World Series, I think you'd see some blow-up starts in there. So we're used to ace-like pitching, and then when a guy does have a slip-up, you say to yourself, well, what is wrong? A couple of things I've noticed with Cole, and he's talked about this himself, trying to be too fine. There was a start against the Mariners where he gave up 6 runs in the first inning and 3 home runs, and he talked about he threw his curveball too much. Here's a guy, Vin, who's got a 100-mile-per-hour fastball in his pocket. Don't forget that you have that pitch. And I think Cole critiqued himself after that start. I think that he is such a perfectionist and that he's so meticulous that sometimes maybe he's out scouting reporting himself. David Cohen has always told me pitchers can't give hitters too much credit. Don't forget that you're the guy who has the baseball on the mound. You're the aggressor. You're the guy who dictates the pace. I think it's all in there for Garrett Cole. It's a matter of him putting it together all at once and, of course, making sure that he can do that when the games matter the most.
Garrett Cole seems to be somewhat, and obviously I want your take as well on this, a creature of habit to some degree as well, where things have to be done at this specific time and in this specific order, especially on his pitching days. But one of the things I noticed, too, and I think Yes Network put out a stat, I guess about a month ago, it's crazy that when Jose Trevino is catching Garrett Cole, that his ERA is almost 2.5 runs lower than Higashioka. But last year, throwing to Higgy, the ERA was 2.5 runs lower than catching Gary Sanchez. Do you think that whoever's catching Garrett Cole makes all the difference? Is it really Trevino making that much of a difference in Garrett Cole this year?
So my gut instinct and my quick answer to you, Vin, is no. I would think that Garrett Cole, as elite a pitcher as he has been, should be able to thrive and should be able to succeed with whoever is catching him. Garrett Cole has also made it clear through conversations with the Yankees, and not anything that he would probably ever say publicly, is that he does have a preference as to who he wants to throw to. As you mentioned, Higashioka over Sanchez last year. This year, Trevino, who does a great job of framing pitches, and what pitcher doesn't love that?
Sure.
Has kind of been the guy who has gotten more of the reps behind the plate. So I know, again, I keep referencing Cohn because I wrote a book with him, but David Cohn loved Jorge Posada as a competitor and loved having him in the lineup. But if you asked him who he preferred throwing to, the guy he preferred throwing to was Girardi. So if you want to get the best out of your ace pitcher and that ace pitcher has a preference, I think it's wise to adhere to that preference.
You know, we've talked obviously a good amount about Garrett Cole, but obviously the rotation that you mentioned at the onset of the conversation needed throughout their stretch run here, and obviously when Nestor Cortez is back and healthy, the Yankees will have a full healthy rotation, him and Severino as well, of course. But you know, people are trying to think, okay, what's the playoff rotation, a possible playoff rotation, going to look like after Garrett Cole? Is it going to be Frankie Montas after him? Is it going to be Severino? Is it going to be Cortez? Do those four pitchers, obviously when fully healthy, locked, loaded, and ready to go, do you think that is a good enough rotation for what the Yankees are trying to do this October?
I do, and I think those are the four guys that you mentioned. We'll see how they get stacked up and who ends up being the guy behind Cole. I think on August 2nd, when the Yankees had acquired Montas, I think they thought he would be the guy. I think he's got some proving to still do to them in order to be the number 2 guy. Severino is someone that Yankee officials talk about with a lot of high hopes. I think if you look at the Yankee situation and what Montas has shown you, I would lean towards Severino right now as a guy you might pitch in a game 2, followed by Montas, followed by Nestor Cortez. So I think that's a rotation that you can win with. I think their bullpen should be strong. I mentioned a couple of the guys earlier. I'm definitely bullish on Loaisiga. The way his sinker was moving on Friday night, to me, is evidence that he's back. I think Holmes comes back as a power. And then they have other pitchers who have contributed at a high level, Ron Marinaccio being one of them, Peralta being one of them. So we can study the rotation and say, is that a rotation you can win with? I think, Vin, the more appropriate question is, do you have a pitching staff that you can win with? Because you get a lead in a postseason game and you're the Yankees. If it's not Cole on the mound, Boone is going to be rushing to get to bullpen matchups that favor the Yankees as quickly as he can.
And to that point, you know, through the first half, through really, I guess, almost 3/4 of the season, the bullpen was a rock. And then there were some tints in the armor there, especially Clay Holmes. With Holmes specifically first, do you think it was a point of him being a first-time closer, getting a lot of, you know, late inning kind of situations, high leverage situations that played any kind of fatigue on what he was doing on the mound, or just kind of the pressure cooker there? Do you think Holmes is the closer going through the rest of the year?
I'll answer the last part first because I think it's an easy answer. Yes, I do think when Holmes comes back, The Yankees might give him an appearance or two where it's low leverage just to see how everything is evolving with him. But I think he's your closer. Again, I don't dismiss the first half of the season. I don't dismiss a guy who in his first 38 appearances had a 0.46 ERA, something that Mariano Rivera had never done through his first 38 appearances. When a guy gets tired, and you just brought that up, the first thing that goes is location and command, and we saw that with Holmes. We saw a guy who threw nothing but strikes suddenly not being able to throw that sinker in the RES broadcast has talked about Holmes's release point might have dropped slightly, and if it drops an inch or two or whatever, the pitch that you want it to go in a certain way isn't going to go the same way. I've pretty much seen every appearance he's had this season, and to me it was almost clear during that skid that he did not have the command of the sinker that he had previously had. It still had movement, it still had velocity, he just didn't have the ability to put it where he wanted to. I think when Holmes comes back off the IL, they're going to see the pitcher they saw in the first half.
You know, with getting important outs, obviously, in the playoffs as well, in addition to Holmes, Loaiza's certainly pitched a lot better of late, kind of like the Johnny Lasagna we all saw last year as well. So I'm sure maybe that's one guy Boone goes to as well. Tom's River native, Ron Marinaccio, who's had a stellar rookie year, I think could get some important outs as well. But I think, and obviously want your insight on this as well, you know, I guess historically in Yankee postseasons, the longer they go, there are certain guys that they've gone to and other guys that kind of just sit in the bullpen because there's a lot of close games. So, I mean, Holmes, Loaiza, Marinaccio, I mean, who are the guys you think are going to be getting important outs down the stretch and in the playoffs?
I would put Peralta in that mix. So right there, that's four guys you can talk about. I think a question mark right now hovers over Chapman, a guy that they have kind of put in timeout, and they haven't released him from that timeout. It seemed as if he had come back, was rounding into the pitcher that they thought he had a couple floppies. So the jury still seems to be out on what are you going to get out of Chapman? How are you going to use him? You look at their recent postseason history and seasons ending with Chapman on the mound. I honestly don't know what the Yankees are going to do with Aroldis Chapman. I think they will try and figure out what he has left. It's a valuable arm. It's a guy who needs to be able to command his pitches to be that valuable pitcher, though. So he is someone that I think there's still a question mark about. But as I said, we mentioned those other four relievers. That's a pretty good start right there. I think Clark Schmidt, who was just recently called up from AAA, his ability to pitch in different roles is somebody that I think can be effective. And then Scott Efros, even though he's on the IL right now, the Yankees have high hopes for him. He can get out both righties and lefties. He's a sinker, changeup, slider guy, and even though he's only a rookie, the Yankees believe that there's a lot to be had from him as the games get even more important.
They obviously have to take care of some business over the next month plus in finishing out the year, winning the AL East, and trying to get the AL's best record as well. But in a possible eventual matchup with the Houston Astros at some point in the playoffs, presumably the ALCS, do you think the Yankees, with all the deals they made at the deadline and how things are looking right now, that they're a match for the Houston Astros, whether that game's at Yankee Stadium or in Houston?
I think that's a matchup we'd all like to see. It's
right.
Interesting that you asked that. I was speaking to my wife today, and I would actually say Pamela's a pretty rabid baseball fan, but she asked me a similar question that you just asked, and I said, I think we need to see where those teams are at that exact moment. I think they match up very well. I think home field advantage matters. I think if you're the Yankees, you had a hold of that home field advantage. You let it slip away. You've now played to a point that it could be back within your grasp. I would not be taking my foot off the gas in mid-September if I were the Yankees. I would be trying very hard to get that home field advantage because I think a matchup looms against Houston, and I think you want to have a potential final game at your stadium, not their stadium.
Jack, want to talk about the offense coming up, but Dave and I have to step out for a break. Can you hang with us?
Absolutely.
Excellent. More Short Time with Vin and Dave and Yes Network analyst Jack Curry right after this.
Hi, this is high performance executive coach Dana Cavalier and former director of strength and conditioning for the New York Yankees. And you're listening to Shore Time with Vin and Dave on 94.3 The Point and 105.7 The Hawk. It's always great to hang with champions, and these two guys are champions.
Welcome back to Short Time with Vin and Dave. Vin Avenue, Dave Crossan with you. And with us here this morning is Yes Network analyst Jack Curry talking about the state of the New York Yankees. We talked a lot about pitching and a possible matchup with the Houston Astros come October and everything. But, Jack, we'd got to dive into the offense a little bit here. We got a slugger who's on his way possibly to breaking Roger Maris's record, and if he really has, a heck of a September, he could, we could start talking about McGuire, Sosa, and Bonds territory there. But starting with Aaron Judge, what are some of the things that, I think Boone's at a loss for adjectives, I think we all are, to describe the kind of year he's having, average-wise, homer-wise, RBI-wise, especially in a year where other major league teams are struggling to hit some home runs in certain cases, but what has been your impression of Aaron Judge this year?
Just a staggering season for a very, very talented hitter who has gotten smarter as a hitter, who has gotten more disciplined as a hitter. You look back to his first full season when he had 52 home runs. I believe he struck out over 200 times. I think he chased more. He had a stupendous season. He hit over 50 home runs. But you watch him now, Vin, and to me, he has improved in leaps and bounds as a hitter. He's not just a power hitter, as his batting average will attest. And I think Aaron Boone discussed this earlier this year, and I think it has applied all season. Judge has done a really good job of taking away the pitcher's best weapon. So if pitcher A thinks that the way he's going to get Judge out is by busting him inside with fastballs and try to get him a foul a couple of pitches off, and then maybe get into a two-strike count and throw a slider away that's never meant to be a strike but looks like a strike and fades out of the zone. Judge just isn't allowing that to happen. Now, it happens at times. He's struck out, I think, about 120-plus times, so there are times where he does stray. There are times where he is beaten. There are times where he misses a pitch. But it does seem, more often than not, if he gets something in the zone, he capitalizes on it. That happened Friday night, first pitch that Sears threw to him in one of the at-bats, and he just clobbered that pitch. So I'm impressed with his power. How can we not be? But I'm just also impressed with how much he has grown as a hitter.
How have you seen those adjustments? It seems like every year he's been able to make those adjustments, including one that you alluded to, whether it's not just pulling the ball, it's going the other way. It's, making those adjustments to, and that discipline as well, to not chasing pitches out of the strike zone. What have you seen since last year with Aaron Judge, with some of the adjustments that he's made that's, led to him hitting pitches and just being more disciplined at the plate?
Well, people think of power hitters and they think of someone who is swinging out of his shoes and everything is trying to hit a ball 500 feet. If you watch Aaron Judge and how controlled he is and how smooth his bat path is and how everything syncs up with his lower half and his upper half, and much like any good hitter, how much he can wait so that there's a level of pitch recognition, how he uses Yankee Stadium, and that's part of waiting on pitches, knowing that the best place to hit a ball at Yankee Stadium is for him to hit it the opposite way. So I think it's a combination of all those things. I think it's studying pitchers. I think it's knowing, Vin, what pitchers are trying to do to you. There's a book on Judge, and I pretty much repeated it or spoke about it just a minute or two earlier. Try and back him off the plate inside, throw him hard stuff inside, see if you can tie him up, and then get in the chase off the plate. Well, Judge is aware of that. Judge knows what pitchers are trying to do to him, and he's not falling prey as often to what they are trying to do. And I know you mentioned those numbers that he is chasing. I almost think at this point, with an entire September and some regular season games ahead of us in October, I think it's an upset if he doesn't pass Roger Maris. I find it hard to believe, unless teams start treating him, giving him the Barry Bonds treatment, I just find it hard to believe how he's not going to end up somewhere in the mid-60s.
I think, especially that with that stretch that the Yankees had from July into really the first half of August, when Judge went into one of those kind of slides himself at the plate, I think part of that was, who was hitting in front of him, who was hitting behind him, and just the Yankees as a lineup not really breaking out in any way, even getting shut out a couple times along the way, where the offense just wasn't doing anything. And I think the other teams are like, all right, well, why pitch to Aaron Judge when I could pitch to whoever else, because they're not hitting. I mean, how important is it to have that kind of consistency in the lineup with not just whoever's hitting in front of Judge, whether it's LeMahieu and or Benintendi, but guys hitting after Judge, Rizzo, Giancarlo, Glaber, Donaldson, and so forth, to be able to have that protection for Judge, not obviously just to break the record, but for Judge to be able to do what he's been doing all year.
Well, we provide a lot of statistical information on Yes, and I'd like to think that all of it is helpful. We had some numbers most recently when Giancarlo Stanton came back, and I think it tells the story of what you're talking about right here. First and foremost, Stanton missed 28 games. The Yankees went 11-17. Anybody can look that up. During those 28 games, Aaron Judge saw the highest percentage of breaking pitches of any hitter in Major League Baseball. So they were not throwing him fastballs. They were not going to challenge him. They were going to try and make him hit their pitches. The other thing is he saw the third highest percentage of pitches outside of the strike zone. So it's all similar to what I was just telling you. They're going to spin some pitches that are going to be outside of the zone, and they're going to hope that Judge bites. And if he doesn't bite, they're willing to walk him because there wasn't, as always, as much of a looming presence behind him. Now, Rizzo's had a nice power year, but he's had his own peaks and valleys. So I do think, Vin, getting Stanton back in the mix, not just because of who Stanton is during his at-bats, but how Stanton impacts the rest of the lineup, I think that not only helps Judge, I think that helps their entire offense.
Do you think the lineup as a whole, at least trying to get 6-7 deep for a playoff run here, what do you need to see out of them to be able to produce numbers, not just to be able to have Judge face good pitches and, hit some home runs, doubles, and everything else, but to show that they're, they could do what they did in the first half, and they're the players on the back of their baseball cards. Obviously, important guys like Judge, Stanton, Rizzo, LeMahieu, Benintendi are five guys that you can count on there. But with some of the other guys as well that have had a lot of peaks and valleys, and some more valleys, Donaldson, Hicks, Glaber, Torres, what do you need to see out of the lineup in the stretch run to show that, this is a Yankee offense that could, roll through October and not struggle?
Now, I may end up beating these words, and he's a professional baseball player being competitive, and he might have a great September and change this thought process. I'm not sure Hicks is somebody the Yankees view as getting a start in the postseason, so I would put him on the shelf for right now. Bader looming as someone who could come back, and if he does and he's healthy, I think he moves ahead of Hicks. I think Donaldson and Torres are guys that there have been times this year where they've had nice little runs, but especially Donaldson, I think it's been a disappointing first season for him. I think Glaber, when he has his controlled approach at the plate and doesn't mind hitting the ball up the middle or hitting the ball to the right side, I think you see Glaber at his best when he almost has that two-strike approach. And a guy that we've sort of forgotten about, Vin, but I don't think should be forgotten about is Matt Carpenter. If you look at the Yankees' numbers with Carpenter in the lineup versus not having him in the lineup, they're dramatic. I don't have them in front of me right now, but it might be a 1.5 difference a game or something like that. So if he can come back from his foot injury and be a DH for you in the postseason, that's big. But of course, that also means Stanton has to get out in the outfield in September, because then you're going Benintendi, Judge, Stanton across the outfield. You're DHing Carpenter, and then guess what? Somebody from Donaldson and Torres is not playing because LeMahieu's playing. I think in any postseason game you play, DJ LeMahieu's on the field. So those guys we just talked about, Vin, they're sort of they're playing for their playing time right now. If Carpenter is a useful, productive player for the Yankees in October, he's playing. So it's a matter of which guys won't be in the lineup.
One guy I want to get your insight on as well, because he's really started to find his stroke at the plate in addition to playing 4 different positions, is Oswaldo Cabrera. As the Yankees make roster moves or whatever in September with guys who have options or don't have options, do you think Oswaldo Cabrera plays a run down the stretch, and do you see him, getting in there at all, maybe as a pinch runner in for defense or something like that in a possible playoff scenario?
I think that's an excellent question, and I think he's in the mix. I think he has put himself in the mix. I think he is a younger, more energetic, more productive right now version of Marwin Gonzalez, who has not had a really good year for the Yankees. So some Yankee fans might say, well, of course he's a more productive version. But Cabrera has looked good. I mean, defensively, this kid has made 4 or 5 plays that some people might play 150 games all season and never make one of the plays that he has made. So I think when you call up young players, you hope for a couple of things. Obviously, you hope they produce. But along the way, you hope that they're not spooked. You hope that they're not unnerved. And you hope that they bring energy. And Cabrera has checked every box. So, yes, I could absolutely see him being a factor. In terms of pinch running, I think Bader, who they think has defense and speed off the charts, I think if he's healthy, I think he looms as a guy who could be a pinch runner for you. But absolutely, Cabrera, in less than 2 weeks, has made him a person that you have to think about for the Yankees in the postseason.
Looking ahead, I guess as much as we can at this point, into the possible offseason, whether the Yankees win it all or come short. And obviously, both hoping that they win the World Series this year as well. But with Aaron Judge first, obviously having a historic season as well, kind of betting on himself, if you will, throughout the course of the year, is your understanding of the negotiations that took place before the year and any that have taken place behind closed doors this year, is it more of a year's thing with Aaron Judge, or was it money, or a little bit of both?
I would imagine it was a little bit of both. I think the Yankees thought they made a very fair offer to Judge. I think they thought in the year in which he will become a free agent and the age that he is and the fact that he had missed a chunk of games through no fault of his own with some injuries, they felt that they were in the area they wanted more. There have been reports that Judge wanted $36 million or more, not the 31 or so that the Yankees were offering. You said it best. Judge bet on himself, and now he gets a chance to go forward. He has said he would love to play his whole career for the Yankees. The Yankees have said they would like to keep Judge. So you hope that those two sides, in giving those kinds of comments, would figure out a way to stay married together.
How much of, not to short sell it in any way either, but how much of a loss would that be if the Yankees aren't offering Judge what he's looking for and he ends up going somewhere else? I mean, I think there's been noted conversations in years past with guys like Derek Jeter and Bernie Williams with contract negotiations that ended up becoming somewhat public. But if Judge were to go, would you see it as a seismic loss as losing a guy like Jeter or Bernie?
Yeah, well, they never lost Jeter or Bernie.
Right.
And I covered those negotiations. And baseball is a business, and two sides are going to go back and forth on what they think a player is worth, and a player is going to talk about what he thinks he is worth. Judge is going to win the MVP this year. If you don't have the reigning MVP in your lineup a year after he was the MVP, obviously that's a loss.
Sure. One futuristic, I guess, question, if you will. I mean, there's a lot of young talent that has made their presence known at the major league level, and some guys that are still in AA and AAA, like Volpe, who's having a fantastic season in the minor leagues as well. But do you think with the kind of talent that's in the minors, both position-wise and pitching-wise, that's Going to lead to some decisions as well in the offseason with what the 2023 Yankees could potentially look like, regardless of what happens in October.
Vin, I'm almost going to sound like a manager or a general manager in answering this question. I'm covering the 2022 Yankees right now. I'm going to the Yes Network and doing pre-games and post-games, and we're talking about this team. There's plenty of time to talk about the 2023 Yankees, and I think Peraza and Volpe and guys like that, you would absolutely believe that going forward, they're in the mix. Peraza's at the AAA level. You mentioned Volpe's having a great AA season. The Yankees passed on an entire army of free agent shortstops to bring in Kiner Falefa with the understanding that they got a couple of really talented young shortstops. So, yes, obviously they got decisions to make ahead, but if I'm a Yankee fan, I would be worried about they're in first place right now. They're trying to hunt down the Astros. They're trying to keep the Jays and the Rays away from them. And you hope you have a pretty entertaining October ahead of you.
As we close up the conversation on the 22 team here, Jack, what are some of the keys, and you've hit on a lot of them so far in our conversation, but what are the keys, the things that need to happen individual-wise or especially team-wise for the Yankees throughout the month of September and going into the playoffs in October for them to ultimately achieve their goal of a World Series ring?
Well, the easy answer is you got to stay healthy. The other thing is when they were winning at such a torrid pace earlier in the season, it's going to sound like a cliche, but they're cliches for a reason. They were doing all the little things right. They were running the bases better. They were playing excellent defense. They were getting solid starts from their starters. When Boone called a guy out of the pen, he picked the right guy, and he applied the right pitcher in what he likes to call the lanes that were available to that pitcher. So I think, Vin, it's a product of being more like they were at the beginning of the season, and it's obviously getting hot at the right time. There are seasons where teams win 100-plus games in the regular season, and then they're not the last team standing. I mean, look at the Atlanta Braves last year. They got very hot at the right time. So that's the team you want to be. I know from covering Jeter's entire career, on more than one occasion, he would say, it's not always the best team that wins in October. It's the best team that gets hot at the right time. So I think if you can make sure you're peaking at the right time, that will help you out a lot.
Jack, I appreciate your insight and your thoughts just on the state of the Yankees team right now, and obviously heading into a very important part of the season, looking to win the East and finish out the regular season with home field. And that everybody's, healthy, ready to rock and roll in the month of October and go after that title.
I appreciate the time, Vin. Thanks for having me.
That is Yes Network analyst Jack Curry. More Short Time with Vin and Dave right after this.
Hey, this is UFC Championship fighter and Toms River High School East alumni Frankie Edgar, and you're listening to Short Time with Vin and Dave on 94.3 The Point and 105.7 The Hawk. Dave and Vin, these guys are the buzz.